Alrighty. Boy, lawyers like to talk, don't they? You think they charge by the hour? It's all right. I get it. So I'm in the awesome position of following the lawyers and being the only thing that stands between you and cake. And we're starting a little late, so I promise that I will go quickly enough that we will not be off schedule too far, and that delicious frosty goodness will be in your hands soon. My name is Joel Cardella. I am a senior security consultant with Rapid7's Global Services, and I'm going to talk to you today about some research that we've been doing at Rapid7. That's pretty interesting stuff. We're going to go through a bunch of the data that has been collected, and then I encourage you at the end to go and download the papers that have all the really good stuff in it, the juicy bits. I'm just going to go through some of the highlights for you here because there's actually quite a lot that goes into it, and it's done by much smarter people than me too, so let's make that clear. I always like to start out my presentations with this slide for one simple reason, and that is, it is true. I am not this man. Moving on. So, alternative talk titles. Bad passwords are bad. That was one of the ones that we threw around for this one. Scan all the things. Now what? Right? And cat videos, the E85 fuel of the internet, because it's something that's kind of intriguing and you sort of want to know about it, but it's just really not worth the time, and at the end it probably doesn't pay off anyway, right? So kind of threw out all those, and we settled on the Attacker's Dictionary, which one of the researchers sort of said sounded like a Harry Potter novel. So Harry Potter and the Attacker's Dictionary, if you will, is going to be what we're going to do. So what we're really talking about with the Attacker's Dictionary is auditing criminal credentialed attacks. Okay, so we'll talk about really what that is, but what goes into it, the magic in the mix, if you will. Rapid7 has a project going on that they started in 2013 called Project Sonar, where essentially it's automated bulk scanning of the internet. So for all of the scanning that we are allowed to do legally, we go out and we do it and we gather data. Now, as this data grows over time, the data sets are going to become more and more valuable. And this research that we're doing is a result of that data starting to become more valuable. We also have a project called Project Heisenberg. Heisenberg is a bunch of low-interaction honeypots that are out on the internet specifically designed to attract malicious actors' attention. So these honeypots are set up in such a way as to look like they're offering valid services, and they'll go so far as to even handshake on those services, but they don't actually deliver any services back. Okay? We'll talk about that later too. RDP. RDP came up as a very interesting thing in the data sets that we'll talk about here, and then just a whole bunch of active usernames and passwords and the things that fell out as a result of that. So these are all things that kind of go into the overall research project. Project Sonar is done by Rapid7. It's also done in conjunction with the University of Michigan. Go Wolverines, I know I'm in Ohio, right? University of Michigan scans.io. So if you go to scans.io, you'll find a lot of data sets from automated scanning of the internet if you're not familiar with that. But it's a very, very good resource to do. Sonar was actually started as an SSL activity. We wanted to go out and see what kind of SSL activity there was out there and see how SSL activity was being exploited. And it kind of evolved into what it has become today, which is this sort of looking for all the things and trying to figure out in some data analysis way what these things show us and what they tell us. So there's a bunch of growing UDP services that are a part of Project Sonar now. Some of the ones are listed here: SNMP, MDNS, right, DNS, NTP, all these things, both TCP and UDP. We're looking at the entire profiles of these across Project Sonar. We are only scanning IPv4 addresses, and that's an important thing. IPv6 is in the plan, but there's so much data to be gathered right now with IPv4 that it doesn't make a whole lot of sense for us to shift the focus at this point. I know that they're planning possibly this year, maybe next year, to start incorporating some of the IPv6 scanning activity into it. So Heisenberg. Again, what Heisenberg is intended to do is it's intended to act like a system that you as a bad person would want to exploit. It will go so far as to handshake with you, but it will not serve you any services back. So we are looking for you to be interested in us, and then we're looking at what you're doing on the interaction side and seeing if we can make some inferences based on that. Does that make sense? Right? Okay. Good. again, we're just looking at authentication handshakes. That's all we're really doing with Heisenberg, okay? One of the things that popped up that was very, very interesting was RDP as a very significant interaction point. There was a lot of RDP activity going on. And this was rather confusing because we know what RDP is, right? Remote Desktop Protocol, port 3389, generally not enabled on laptops and desktops. It's something you have to turn on. So why would we see a lot of RDP activity? And as we started to look at it, it turns out that many, many, many point of sale systems use RDP as their remote connection method. So the conclusion, the inference, right, without hard data to back it up, is POS systems are really systems that are being looked for within the Heisenberg sphere, right? Another thing that we found is we found that RDP is kind of a choice service that attackers are using to serve out scamware or to try to do financial scams. And one of the ways that was apparent was actually in a tweet by Randy, where he said, hey, I see a bunch of activity from TD Bank's network out to all their customers looking for RDP and looking for VNC. Why would they be doing that? Why would they be doing that? Right? The answer is they wouldn't. Somebody was pivoting through their network and probing their customers' systems, looking for these connections, looking for RDP. So we said, okay, this is super interesting. RDP is kind of more in use than we thought it was. What would actually that look like if people were doing stuff with it? So we did some traffic analysis with that, and we wanted to see how big the RDP space was, right? So we scanned the entire internet using Project Sonar, which, you know, that's probably roughly a few hours of activity. That can be compressed if we're really just trying to laser focus in on some things, but generally about 4 hours, 2 to 4 hours of activity. We can scan the entire internet and lightly look for these things. We move that through a geo IP address database, and we map out where they all are, and we came up with a map. It's kind of interesting, right? Where it shows where these distributions are. It's a lie. That map is a lie. All that map is a population distribution map, right? You could literally take anything that you're talking about and say, this is a map of that thing. If you go to XKCD 1138, Randall does a good job of illustrating that, okay? But the weird thing was, it actually is true for us. When we did kick it through the GeoIP database, we did wind up with kind of a population distribution map. So that led us to the conclusion that where this activity was happening was generally where human populations were centered. So these are not isolated systems in the middle of Antarctica, right, that are being exploited. We're looking for civilization concentrations that have active RDP use in them. So we record the events, and this is from Heisenberg's view. So again, I'm Heisenberg, I'm sitting on my side, you're probing me, you're asking me for handshake activity, authentication activity. We're specifically focused in on RDP now. And we plot this over time. Now, the interesting things are the spikes in the graphs. Because as you can see, it's fairly reasonable activity, especially in the months between like July and January. This is 2015 to early 2016 timeline. But these spikes happen. So why did the spikes happen? Again, we're on the receiving side. We're just seeing what you're sending us. We're inferring there that perhaps there's some intelligence that bad actors are coming across that is kicking up their activity, and they're looking for more interaction. They're probing, if you will, for more activity on that scale. What that intelligence is, we have no idea. We do not know. One of the slices and dices that we did with that data is we studied it by country, right? So these would be opportunistic attacks. And the spike there that we can see is actually South Korea is the big spike where the red arrow is. So there was something that happened on that day or that 2 days where a bunch of activity came from South Korea that was probing for new RDP activity. Again, we're not really sure why, but we see it happening. Could they have found a schematic from an IoT provider that builds these systems that maybe had an embedded username and password, and this is what they were trying, right? That's one possibility. There's all kinds of possibilities that this brings up. But again, you know, we're sitting here, we're just taking in the activity, and we're trying to make some inferences on the data. So it doesn't tell us a lot, but it does give us a focus. It allows us to kind of look in a little bit closer and say, what can we do with these things, these pieces of information? How can we construct them, right? So this is a real map. This is actually where the attack sources are coming from. And as you can see, it somewhat lines up with the population distribution, but we see a lot from the United States, we see a lot from Europe, we see a lot from Russia. These are not surprises for us, right? This is the origination activity into what Heisenberg is taking in. China's got about 20% of the human population and roughly 20% of the user population. So we would expect to see activity like that, for example, right? Endpoints in China are responsible for about 40% of all the sources, with the US coming in second with about 25% of all the sources. Now, this does not identify whether or not they're using a proxy, right? So we're just looking at packet origination, and whatever the packet header is saying, this is where you're coming from, we're just dropping it on the map. Okay, so there's a lot here that we have to fuzz to make our inferences, but we can still draw some good conclusions from it, right? So I'm just trying to point out that the data science isn't exactly perfect. So interestingly enough, one of the things that we saw is we saw a lot of combinations of passwords that were tried in these RDP spaces, okay? Which again, we assume are point of sale systems because we see the prevalence of the point of sale systems out there. What do you think was the number one password that was tried? Was not password. It was not admin.
No.
What?
No. Nothing?
Null? It was not null. It was close to null. No. It was not. It was not any of the ones that you're used to seeing when you look at the list of the worst passwords or anything. It was actually the lowercase letter x. Why? We don't know. Right? We literally don't know. The lowercase letter x. So what you have in there, if you can't see it too well, we've got the lowercase letter x followed by an uppercase z and a lowercase z as the second most prevalent try for passwords, right? Followed by, geez, I can't read it here. That's a user string, followed by the number 1, followed by password. Password's on there as number 5, right? All the way down, admin is on there. So it's kind of some typical things. But why, again, you know, the data scientists speculate, why did we see this letter X? What has happened? Yeah.
Default for some manufacturer?
Possibly, but we don't know because the researchers actually did some intel themselves, right? And they did some Google searches and they did some other stuff. The only thing that they came up with that was even close to maybe making sense was there was a Krebs post where he mentioned POS systems with a default of X as a password. And where he got that information, I don't know. But that was like the only reasonable thing that somebody could construct to go, maybe somebody read this and they just fed it into a giant botnet and tried it, maybe, right? We don't know. But it's a really weird thing to see, especially when we're accustomed to seeing bad passwords, but not that bad, right? You know, we expect to see these sort of logical things. Another weird thing that popped up was a username and password, Alex. Alex. Again, don't know why. Where was this found? Right? Somebody, are they trolling the dark web and they're finding something on the dark web that maybe is suggesting this? Or, you know, is it out on Git or whatever? I mean, we did our own searches. We tried to track down the information. We could not find the information in the regular sources that we would check to identify this stuff. But it's interesting to see. Usernames, kind of the same thing. The most common username is administrator with a lowercase, followed by administrator with an uppercase. Right? Not surprising. RDP is strongly associated with Windows. Therefore, that's a logical conclusion. We're going to see administrator as the username. But remember, we're seeing the password X. So administrator X is the combination that we're seeing most often in the Heisenberg side of things. So what does that tell us? Why would this happen? You know, it would be interesting to find out why this would be. What would be really interesting is to be able to take that information and actually use it in practice and see if it returns something. But we're not allowed to do that because that's illegal. Right? And we'll talk about that too. Did you have a question?
I was going to say you could speculate maybe they got a honeypot from somebody and they just gave fake information.
There's all kinds of reasons it could be, right? I mean, again, they're pretty smart people that are working on this stuff and they know a lot of the tricks that are out there, but maybe they don't know all the tricks, right? And that's really what's kind of being implied here is we might not be as smart as we think we are, but I don't think they're as smart as we think they are. Right, by trying this stuff. It's one of these things where it's just like neither side is willing to really admit what's going on. You know, it's this weird game of Red Rover, you know, who's next? So one of the things we did is we also looked at, no, before we go, I want to say that in position number 6, the username POS shows up. And so this is one of the reasons that we're suspecting that there's a lot of point of sale activity, is because we see POS as a username, and we did see combinations of POS as part of this. So this is why the inference for RDP associated with POS systems is strong, right? Again, not solid data science behind it. It's limited to what we can gather, but it's probably pretty close to valid, at least in the mind of somebody who's doing it. So one of the things that we're also looking at here is we're looking at password complexity. Complexity is many things to many people, right? And so the way Rapid7 did complexity is they used a tool that was developed by Dropbox called ZXCVBN. If you've never heard of this, it's a password complexity algorithm that they designed to measure password complexity. And then they released it for free on Git. So if you go to GitHub, you can find ZXCVBN and you can see the rules in there. So there's length rules, there's entropy rules, there's other rules that are put in there. But it was interesting to look at some of the complexities, because what we saw were the complexities of the passwords that were being tried in RDP were much lower than even the poorest complexities of regular user passwords, right? So why would that be? Again, what things are happening? Is it on the IoT side, right? Is it on the manufacturer side? Is it embedded? What is it? We don't know. But it's interesting to look at to see how complex they were. And they had various degrees of complexity. ZXCVBN goes from like 0 to 4, I think, and it gradually gets more complex as it goes down the scale. And then we just saw the distributions happen at the lower end of the scale a lot. So these are just really easy things that are being tried. And if they're working, that's probably a concern, right? I think. Password lifetimes. So the longest password that was tried over the period that was measured was 334 days before we didn't see it happening anymore. Okay? There were about 4,000 passwords that were recorded, unique passwords. 800 of them were only used one time. We saw them once, they never came back again. That's another interesting data point, right? Is it just guesswork, or is it based on something that somebody knows something about, right? They're throwing it out there, they're trying it, they're whatever, right? We don't know. It's uncertain, I guess. But here's the thing, if you could do something like measure this, if you had a sort of Heisenberg capability and you saw this stuff starting to happen, and then you were able to turn that around and kind of scan your own network and scan your peers and see all this stuff around you, if you saw that it was working, you could, in fact, work with CERT or other organizations to maybe improve what was going on around you. But the severely limiting factor for us really is the CFAA. So we know where the endpoints are. We know where the scanners are. We know what the attackers believe are good credentials. We can't directly measure the attack space because of the limitations of the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act, right? That's really the what we're facing here. So we can assess 3389. Or we can make recommendations. We can assess 3389, and we can say, is it something that we need to use in our network or not? And if it's not used, turn it off. We can employ a VPN and say, always use a VPN to come in to these particular connections. Let's say they are point-of-sale systems, right? Assuming they are point-of-sale systems, don't use 3389, and always use a VPN for connectivity or some other point-to-point connection method, right? The biggest problem with that is the people who are responsible for doing that just don't hear that message. Either they're not in security, they're not responsible for it, they don't understand it, it's not in their silo, right? It's all of these things. So the people who need this information are not really the people who are getting it. And as researchers, it's difficult for us to be able to help them because we're limited by research. The CFAA limits everything we're allowed to do. For instance, we cannot actively test suspect credentials. So even though we see Administrator X and Alex, we can't probe the internet for those credentials and see if we're actually getting onto devices. That's illegal. Okay? So if you're ever doing this on your own and you're testing stuff and you're like, I wonder if this works, don't ever do it outside your own network. That's illegal. That's a violation of the CFAA. Be warned. And I'm not a lawyer, okay? But I will tell you, you'll have to answer some questions, right? Collaborating with other researchers in password research is risky. We've just seen, there's just been news articles about password sharing where they're saying, if you share your Netflix password, that's against the law. That might be an extreme example, but password sharing is looked at as potential fraudulent activity. So it's difficult for Rapid7 to collaborate with other research firms in other security organizations and say, hey, let's see what we can do together. Let's see how we can make this a thing and get some good data out of it. It's really difficult for us to do. It's not that we don't want to do it. Everybody wants to share, but we're being limited. It's very hard. Right? Nobody has the authority to measure or fix the weak password problem, and authentication-based attacks and attacks on POSs are favored by criminals. So it's kind of frustrating to sit where we are to go, hey, we know we can do something. We know we can at least gather data. We know we can test our hypotheses and see if, in fact, they are true, but we're limited. We can't really do that legally. It's very hard. What do? We have to contact a manufacturer. We have to get the manufacturer's device inside the network. Then we test it. Is that a valid test, right? Does it apply to a million other devices? I mean, it doesn't really answer those questions. It's not satisfactory enough for our purposes. So we kind of do this research in a vacuum. We hope for the best and, move along, right? That's kind of where it is. But honestly, there's a silver lining. Things are starting to improve. We, as a company, have been reaching out to legislators. There's at least one legislator I'm aware of who has changed their stance on research, and specifically the research clause in the CFAA. And you may have heard about the ACLU recently suing the federal government over the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act. Now, the ACLU's lawsuit specifically is focused on anti-discriminatory actions. However, if they are successful and they get research basically excluded or exempted from the CFAA, that bodes well for us. So we can kind of piggyback on that and go, hey, there's these other things that we want to do. We'll probably have to take a very careful approach at doing it, but that's okay. We'll be allowed to do it, and that's the important thing, right? So kind of think of it as, everybody gets free pen testing. That's what we're talking about. And if you're a pen tester, I'm sorry, right? All right, so what have we done with the information? So it's cool that we can get it. And it's cool that this stuff is out there. But really, what are some of the things that we can infer from it? So we analyze the sonar data and the Heisenberg data. And we want to understand the overall threat exposure on the internet. So we're defining threats basically as well-known ports or ports that are easily compromised, ports that are sending unencrypted, clear text information, right? That's what we would call exposure. So you build a server, you put it out on the internet, and it has all of the unencrypted, clear text open ports on it. We would call that an exposed system, right? Would you agree? I would hope you would agree, right? Don't try that at home, by the way. So we came to a really startling initial discovery, and that is the internet is broken. Surprise, right? Why is the internet broken? Well, part of the problem with analyzing our data is with unencrypted plain text transmissions, many companies out there, many bad actors, many good actors can manipulate the data. They can intercept it and they can manipulate it. So it's very hard for us to do things like prove origination. Are you coming through a proxy, or are you a man in the middle telling me where you're coming from? So when we geolocate you, we don't really know where you're at. Are you changing the information I'm getting? There's all kinds of things that are happening with regards to clear text unencrypted transmission. So that impedes us and causes us some problems for sure, right? We don't really have good solid data. We have to make inferences based on what we can see. Kind of the second thing that we found is that the internet of 2016 is very much like the internet of 1996. It's just a lot bigger, but not a lot has changed. Since the internet became a thing, right, in 1996, of course it existed far before that, but not in commercial success, right? In the commercial success of the internet in 1996, some of the same things were going on that are going on today. So it hasn't changed much. Prince, however, did not change much either, right? Prince was only 5'2". He had a really nasty good jump shot, and I heard he made great pancakes. That's a fact. You can look it up, right? So we started with a simple hypothesis. We said, do countries with larger, more robust economies have a correspondingly larger internet presence, and how does this presence relate to overall exposure to internet-based threats? Basically, what we're saying is, if you look at something like a country's gross domestic product, does the GDP of a country relate to their presence on the internet? And subsequently, does their presence on the internet relate to how exposed they are? Okay, so it's just a simple tease to play with to say, how would this information work out is it something that would be correlated? Now, we're going to look into data science just a little bit here. This is the only slide I have on it. Correlation does not equal causation. You may have heard this before. If you're not a statistics person, I want to explain this to you. What it means is, if we find a country with a GDP that is high, and we find that country has a large internet presence, that does not mean that the fact that they have a high GDP means they have a large internet presence. In other words, if their GDP goes up, their internet presence is not going to go up with it. It's not causal. Or if they expand their internet presence, suddenly their GDP is going to go up. It's not causal. As Tyler Vegan shows you here in a fantastic site called Spurious Correlations, and if you've never been there, I highly recommend going there and playing with the data. He shows you that the number of people who drowned by falling into a pool correlates with the films Nicolas Cage appeared in. So does that mean that the more films Nicolas Cage appears in, the more people die? It does not. It just happens to correlate. And you can go to Spurious Correlations and you can pick from thousands of data sets that all correlate together, and it's really interesting to see. But a lot of people make this mistake, and that's why I pointed out, because we can see correlations and we can infer things from correlations, but they doesn't mean that they are connected. It doesn't mean that they cause each other, right? So be careful with correlation when you're looking at data. One of the interesting things that comes back from scanning the entire internet is we can see things like this. Now, this is a terrible graphic, so go to the paper, get the paper. There's a much better graphic in the paper, but it's kind of reduced here for you to see. Essentially, what this is a heat map of all of the nodes that responded to our requests on the internet when we are looking at the various things we're looking at. The brighter nodes, every pixel in this map, by the way, is a /24 network, so 256 IP addresses in every pixel. Okay? The bright pixels are the ones that responded to almost or all requests that we made. The dark ones were the ones that didn't respond at all. So we can kind of see at a glance, if you will, that there are populations on the internet that are very highly reactive to queries, right? Or perhaps maybe this means they're very exposed because they're not secured, perhaps. They're not locked down. They're answering every request that's being sent to them. Right? Maybe. That's something that is certainly possible. So what we had to do is we had to really contain the data set. So when you look at something like this, if every one of those is a /256 and we're scanning, whatever the 14 billion IP addresses or whatever it is, right? We have to narrow our focus in order to get good data. So what we did is we narrowed it down to about 30 common ports, right? And the reason it's 30 is we chose half from really popular Nmap services, and basically the really geniuses at Rapid7 chose the other 15 and said, I think these would be good to include in the report. So we came up with 30, sort of based on seat of our pants or intuition, but it's good enough to start. Again, you can make inferences based on these 30 ports. So, what did we find when we started to look at 30 ports? Well, 20 million nodes responded to FTP. Right? What does that tell you? That means there's one big old botnet out there just waiting to do stuff. We found 14 million printers connected directly to the internet. What does that mean? So, small story I want to tell you just because it's hilarious. My neighbor, who was not very computer savvy and had a wireless network that just bled across the entire neighborhood. It was, I don't know, I hit a high frequency booster or something. It was like 15 houses down would pick his network up. He hooked up a wireless printer, and I used to tell him about it. I used to say, let me help you with this. We can restrict the signal. We can do stuff. And he was like, no, everything's fine. Everything's fine. So to get him to change his mind, I started printing stuff to his printer. It would come up as a viable printer in my network, and so I would select it and I would print stuff. And he came over one day and he's like, I think I've been hacked. I said, why? He goes, because all this stuff keeps printing out on my printer. I'm like, really? I go, maybe it's that your signal is so strong that people are just picking it up and printing to it. He's like, oh yeah, can you help me with that? Yes, I can. So, self-correcting problem, right? But 14 million printers connected directly to the internet, what does that mean? It's a pivot point. Right? It doesn't mean that I want to print stupid stuff on your printer. It means I'm going to take it over and use it to attack everything else around it.
That's your weed.
Right? Yes.
Yeah.
That is true. Actually, or Daryl. Daryl knows some things about printers. Right? Don't you? You do. 11.2 million MySQL or MSSQL servers responded. So databases that responded to those port requests. Gee, don't know what data was in there, but that's probably not good. Right? I would think. Here's an awesome one. 15 million nodes, 10% of all the nodes in the survey responded to Telnet. Anybody know how old Telnet is? Take a guess. It is older than you. Take a guess. How much?
45?
More than 40. More than 45. 47. 1969. RFC 15 denoted the telnet specifications, and it was used for remote administration of systems. And 15 million nodes in a casual scan of the internet responded. Why? Why? Why do we insist on using services like Telnet that are 47 years old? They were never designed with security in mind. You cannot secure that. Like, literally, you can't just go back and secure it. It wasn't designed with a security specification. Why are we using it? I don't know. It's a really good question, and I'd like to find out the answer. But there is some good news, too. So one of the things we did is we kind of looked at corresponding ports. So we looked at Telnet, and then we looked at Telnet compared to SSH. And then we looked at port 80 compared to port 443. And we kind of paired these things up. And what we found is, this is from the report. All the ones in green are encrypted ports, and all the ones in red are not encrypted. And we found that generally, like for instance, with HTTPS, 15 million nodes use HTTPS and 75 million nodes had port 80 open, right? Port 80 is one of those things that's kind of subjective because there's so much stuff that goes over port 80. But, you know, if 66% of that traffic is encrypted traffic, that's probably a good start for us. We're also seeing things like POP3S, IMAP-S, SMTP-S, right? All of our secure mail services gaining some ground too. So again, it's a good thing that this is happening, but it needs to happen more because the unencrypted stuff, the clear text stuff, still way outperforms the encrypted stuff when it comes to just casual queries and stuff that's out there, stuff that's responding to requests anyway, right? All right, so any NXS fans? Forget you guys. All right, so we hallucinate, we desegregate, we mediate, we alleviate, we try not to hate, we geolocate. That is from NXS Mediate. And what do we find? We have the National Exposure Index that is born. Okay? So Rapid7 is creating this thing we're calling the National Exposure Index. And what we're doing with the National Exposure Index is we're taking this data, as I've described it to you poorly, and we're putting it into some reports, and we're going, okay, if we can scan the internet, and we can see a bunch of services that are responding to us, and we can start breaking these subsets down, and we can say, all of the nodes that responded on all of the ports that we scanned, with a gross numbers of responses put next to them, we can build an index and make an inference and say, at the top of the scale, you're going to be more exposed, and at the bottom of the scale, you're going to be less exposed. Or the implication there is, at the top of the list, you're probably less secure or using less secure channels than you are at the bottom of the list, right? And here's an example here, SMTP exposure. So for instance, Sudan, Jordan, Guatemala, Vietnam, and the Republic of Korea all had very exposed services with SMTP, okay? Versus the bottom of the list, and that's in order. So Ireland is the best, if you will. I don't want to say best and worst, but that's really what it is, right? Germany, the UAE, Netherlands, Estonia, and Ireland, right, for those services. Does that make sense, how the National Exposure Index is working? So we really want to promote the National Exposure Index. We really want people to start paying attention to it and start looking at this stuff. And I will tell you, we angered a lot of countries, okay? There were a lot of calls that people had to be on to deal with angry diplomats once we published this information, because what it looks like we're doing here is kind of, you know, pulling back this curtain and saying, oh, look how ugly your baby is. Okay, well, on the internet, all babies are ugly, right? They are. It's just it's a fact of the world. What we're trying to do is say, hey, you know, Sudan, maybe you should look at secure mail services, right? Maybe moving your services from this port to this port, which isn't hard, it's not a complex thing, right? Maybe that would benefit you. That's really what we're saying here. By the way, pro tip, whenever you're Googling for images of exposure, clip art, you do get unintended results. Okay, I got that one. All right, let's play a game. So, out of the 50 countries who run the most overall exposed services nationwide, so the top 50 list that we put in our report, right? We have the most exposed to the least exposed. Let's answer a couple of questions. Where do you think the United States ranks? Out of the top 50, where do you think they rank? Are they more exposed or less exposed? What do you think? The middle is a very good guess. It's actually 14, right? So That's actually, in my mind, good because the United States also had the most nodes respond overall. Okay? So what that tells you is if they had the most nodes respond overall, but they're 14th on the list of what's most exposed, that means there's a lot that's not exposed. So that's actually good. All right? Again, correlation, not causation. We're not saying that these things are related. We're saying we're correlating the items together and going, oh, hey, this is a pretty good thing for us to be in. Yeah.
Some networks are wrapped in firewalls. The firewall may actually answer up the whole.
Sure. Absolutely true. And there's no way of determining it with what we're doing. No, we can't right now because the CFAA stops us. We have to, whatever, if I send you a request and you send me a request back, that's all I'm allowed to do. So if you're a if you're a firewall, if you're a man in the middle, if you're a proxy, I don't know that, right? I only know that you're answering me and I'm recording that as you answered me or vice versa.
Even in that scan, you get some additional, you're looking at the attributes of the responses, maybe distinguish Windows from Linux versus
I think that's true. You probably can distinguish those things at a fundamental level, right? Yeah, sort of. I guess sort of is the answer. I'm not the data scientist, so I'm not the one doing it, to be fair. Those guys are super smart, and they're going as far as they can with the data, I can tell you that. Right? Any question? Okay, so United States. Now, how about this? Are China and Russia, who are two names that we tend to throw around a lot in security, right? Are they more exposed or are they less exposed? What do you think? Okay. I will tell you this. One is more and one is less. What do you think it is?
China more.
China is more and Russia is less. China is number 5, I think, or 4, and Russia is like 19 on the list, right? That's interesting to me. China also has a significant amount of nodes. I think they were number 2. When we queried all the nodes that answered, I think it went to US and China, if I remember correctly, right? If not, they're somewhere in the top 3 or 4. Okay? So the fact that if you sort of compare these two countries and you say, oh, here's the US with a bunch of nodes, here's China with a bunch of nodes, the US tends to lock things down and China doesn't, that's an interesting piece of information that potentially could be useful, right? It's interesting. All right, now, which country is the most? Now, here's the deal. If you get it, I'll tell you. If you don't get it, you have to go download the report. Okay? So what do you think is the number 1 country? Now, I will tell you this. When we ran the GDP correlations, right? So remember, gross domestic product is how wealthy the country is, all right? Correlating to the presence of their internet, correlating to the amount of exposure, we found that these were distinctly not related. So the fact that you had a high GDP country does not necessarily mean that it had a high internet presence, and the fact that it had a high internet presence does not mean it was highly exposed. Okay? So given that, what do you think we'll start with the least. I'll tell you what the least is. What do you think was the least exposed? The country with the least amount of exposure. You're really close. It's the neighbor. It's, no, I'm sorry. You were very close. I thought it was South Korea, but it's not. Very close. It was Vietnam. Vietnam was the least exposed overall. Now again, remember, we're only looking at 30 ports, right? We're looking at what's coming back. But the GDP of Vietnam is nowhere near what the GDP of the US or China is, right? So that's an interesting thing. It's like, oh, wow, are they putting more efforts into securing their systems? Or did they not deploy as many systems? Or maybe the configurations they're deploying are secure by default. These are all possibilities that are happening. All right. Did you have a question? Say it again. I didn't quite catch it. The population of computers as related to the amount of exposure. So in the report, if you look in the report, they do talk about the number of networks that are responding. And so based on the subset of the networks that are responding, we are assuming that those are computers that, in the sense that you're talking about, like users/computers, right? Again, it's not really a correlation, or it's not an inference that we can make directly because we don't have the information, but yeah, it's implied that is true. Right? So what do you think is number 1?
Texas.
India.
The country of Texas. It's not India. All right, if you don't know, go download the report. It's right here. Very easy to get. And put it in your email so we can send you lovely marketing spam. Wahaha. That's all it takes is just a little email from you. But you can get both the Attacker's Dictionary, which is the first part of what I talked about. That's all the information on sonar and Heisenberg. And you can get the National Exposure Index, which is the second part I talked about, what we were talking about just now, downloaded as papers. Now, the cool thing about the papers that we do is we will give you the data sets, we will give you the code, we give you pretty much everything to replicate the stuff on your own. So if you don't believe us, right? Or if you want to challenge some things, or if you just want to play with stuff, you can go there and all the resources that are there for you to do that with. Okay? So go there, grab the papers. They're not that big. They're 20 pages of really big print and a lot of pictures, right? So great stuff. I like it when there's a lot of pictures, right? Easy to read. So what are the conclusions? Really, what we're saying is bad actors are not necessarily savvy with regards to hacking into systems. Very often, the media will portray hackers in a romantic, light where they're Mr. Robot types that sit in the corner and are these brilliant geniuses doing things. Now, sometimes they're just lucky, right? Sometimes they're just trying stuff out and, oh, look at that works, right? They could be script kiddies. They're just running scripts and feeding information in. That's very, very true. We can see that probably from the password information that we're seeing where things are being tried only once and they're just moving on to other stuff, right? IPv4 is alive and kicking. That is another conclusion that we have made from this. There is a heat map in the report that shows you the IPv4 space, and the amount of space that isn't responding because it's either reserved or unallocated is huge. It's huge. I myself, about 6 months ago, wrote a blog post about, we've reached the end of the internet. The last IP address was given out September 15th, 2015. Time to move to IPv6. Nope. Right? 40% of the DoD, or 40% of the IP addresses in IPv4 is owned by the DoD, and they probably haven't allocated 10% of what they own. Which means if they just relinquish it back, we're on IPv4 forever, right? Just the way it is.
I just turned on IPv6 on my home router, so it works.
Oh, sure. You can use it, and we encourage IPv6. I mean, there are good, secure routing mechanisms that IPv6 uses. We would like to see IPv6 adopted, but with IPv4 alive and kicking and being so prevalent, and probably there's a supply out there that's just not been released into the pool, we're probably going to keep seeing it for a long time. Probably, yeah. Yeah, even Windows machines, by default, when you open up, they route to both, right? Because Microsoft's trying to push IPv6. I mean, everybody's trying, but if there's no reason to move, nobody's going to move. Nobody's going to force it. It's just the way it is, right? And we can see it with the data. GDP correlates to internet presence, but it's not necessarily causal. So again, the high GDP countries were not necessarily having the largest number of nodes out there. The US was one of the ones that did. China was one of the ones that did, right? But Russia, which has a very high GDP, did not. That's interesting, right? And you can see in the report, it'll show you all the graphs laid out in cool data science-y, wizardy ways.
That's because their computers are cold.
Could be. Could be. Iceland was on there. Iceland and somebody else. And I was like, wow, they have computers there? How do they run? I was thinking the same thing. Unencrypted services are still a major part of internet traffic. And so it's a big risk. We're running a ton of stuff unencrypted. And I think the struggle that we have, especially in security and especially in research, is why. We're not really sure why. Now, sometimes it's hard. Sometimes it's hard to move your services, to move your platforms, to move your applications. But sometimes it's not. The difference between using Telnet and SSH is, literally installing SSH. I mean, that's how easy it is, right? It runs on mostly everything. Unless you're on really super legacy hardware that probably shouldn't be on the internet anyway, right? It should be on private networks only. I don't see a reason we don't use SSH by default. It's a very strange thing, right? But it's still out there. And then we need better laws protecting security research. We need to be able to be probative with the data that we have. And if we can be probative with that data, we can draw much better conclusions about what's going on there. Are POSs using RDP, and are they susceptible to administrator X or Alex or POS, right? Let's go out there, let's try it. Let's see how many devices are actually responding to us. Let's go to the manufacturer and say, guys, change your defaults, right? Do something, or at least put it in your user manuals, your user documentation. Push it. When you're doing deployment services, push it. Do what you can. Get this stuff out there, right? The default creds, that's still one of the biggest enemies we have in InfoSec. We consult with clients all the time, and one of the first questions we ask is, when did you change your default passwords for these devices you rolled out? And 80% of the time they go, we didn't change them. Okay, well, glad you called us because we're going to change those today, right? That's just the way it is. So that's what I have for you today. Oh, security can't be considered optional if we want more internet growth, right? That's the big thing here. So again, GDP, it's an important thing. And if people are doing e-commerce and leveraging e-commerce the way it is, they need to secure their systems and make them better and less exposed in order to get better at that e-commerce, which means growth, right? So it's sort of an anti-thinking. A lot of executives will say, I spend money on security and I don't get anything back, right? There's no return on my investment. What's my value investment for security? It's a really, really hard thing to say. But when we start to take data in aggregate and we look at this as an overall kind of thing, we can go, the more we secure these systems, the more business we can do. And the more business we can do, the better it is. That's the value, right? Do you have a question?
Did you just accept the credentials and terminate the session?
Yes.
Try to fake your-
No, you can't. We cannot fake anything. No, we just accepted it. So we're sitting as Heisenberg going, 3389, I'm listening. And you come to me and you say, hey, are you listening? And I go, yep. So it's lightweight Synac. And then you go, I'm administrator X. And I just record it in my database. And that's the last thing that happens. Boom. Fin. Terminates. I think we could. Sure. I think we could probably even send a response back legally, but it wouldn't really serve our purposes. And most specifically with the honeypot, we don't want to give away the fact that it's a honeypot, so we'd rather just terminate the session and look like it was a bad session. Any other questions? There you have it. Thank you very much.